You are not our real daughter. You never were. And frankly, looking at you standing there, I think we always knew we made the wrong choice. My mother said that in the living room of the house I grew up in, on the afternoon of my 27th birthday, in front of 11 people, including my aunt, two of my cousins, my mother's oldest friend, Diane, and a man I had never seen before in my life. My name is Nora Callahan. I am 27 years old. This is the story of how I discovered I had a twin sister my parents had hidden from me since the day we were born, how she and I found each other across 1,400 miles of silence, and what happened when we walked back into that living room together with a camera rolling and the truth already fully assembled. The reversal has already happened. My parents know I know. The world has seen it. What I want to do now is tell you exactly how we got there. I've thought about where to begin this story more times than I can count, and I keep coming back to the same place. Not the beginning, but the moment I understood there even was a story. If any part of what I'm about to share resonates with something you've carried in your own life, I'd like to hear about it. And I hope you'll stay with me through the full telling, because nothing here resolves the way you might expect. The house I grew up in was a 4-bedroom colonial on Hartwell Drive, in a mid-sized Ohio city called Delwood, population approximately 34,000. We lived in the older part of town, where the lots were wide and the trees were tall enough to block the streetlights. In summer, the whole neighborhood smelled like cut grass and the inside of a hot car. In winter, it smelled like nothing, just cold and concrete and whatever my mother was cooking, which was usually something involving cream of mushroom soup from a can. The house had a finished basement my father called the rec room and my mother called the downstairs, as though the word basement suggested poverty. There was a formal dining room we used 11 times a year, 10 for Sunday dinners and once for Christmas, and a kitchen where everything actual happened. The kitchen table had a long scratch across one end from when my brother Marcus dropped a screwdriver on it in 1999. Year he was 12, he was never asked to pay for it. I remember noting that even then, my family, as I understood it growing up, my father, Gerald Callahan, 61 at the time this story ends, a retired regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical distribution company, a man who wore ironed khakis on weekends and had an opinion about everything except the things that mattered. My mother, Patricia Callahan, née Fontaine, 58, who volunteered at the parish, maintained a garden she photographed more than she tended, and who had spent 30 years carefully managing the story of our family the way other people manage a brand. Then Marcus, my brother Marcus, 31, the eldest, the son. The reason sentences in our household frequently began with the phrase, "Marcus has always been." Marcus got the car at 16. Marcus got the apartment deposit paid for when he moved to Columbus at 22. Marcus got every benefit of every doubt in every room he walked into. And the remarkable thing, the thing I only fully understood later, was that he didn't even seem to want most of it. He was just the default recipient of everything my parents had to give. And then me, Nora the younger one, the girl, the one who got A's and was told she was lucky school came easy, the one who got a partial scholarship to Ohio State and was told she should be grateful she didn't have to pay full tuition, as if the other half had materialized from nowhere, rather than from the $34,000 in student loans I signed for at 18, while my mother stood next to me, with her purse on her arm and said nothing. The one who came home for holidays and sat at the kitchen table and ate the cream of mushroom casserole and smiled, because that was what I did. I smiled. I was good at it. What I did not know, what I had never once been told, was that I arrived in this world with someone else. That when my mother checked into Delwood General Hospital on March 14, 1997, she was carrying 2 babies. That she delivered both of them. That the second one, a girl, was quietly arranged out of our family's life within 4 days of her birth, handed to a private adoption agency in a transaction my parents paid $3,500 to facilitate, and never mentioned again. Not to Marcus, not to my Aunt Linda, not to anyone who ever sat at that formal dining room table for one of those 11 Sunday dinners, not to me. I did not know I had a twin sister until I was 26 years old, and the way I found out was not through my parents, or a deathbed confession, or a document I stumbled across in the basement. I found out because she found me first. But before I get to that, I need you to understand something about the texture of growing up in that house. Because this story isn't just about a secret, it's about what a secret does to the air inside a family over years, over decades, without anyone naming it. There was something in that house I could never quite locate, a pressure, a kind of static, and I want to walk you through the moments that constituted it, because they matter. They were not random. I understand that now. The first scene I want to tell you about happened when I was 9 years old, in the kitchen on a Saturday afternoon in late October. Marcus was 12. My mother was making something at the stove, and I was sitting at the table doing homework, and I asked her, in the way children ask things, without guile, without expectation, whether I looked more like her or more like Dad. She turned from the stove slowly. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "You look like yourself, Nora." That was all. She turned back to the stove. I didn't think about it again for years. It was not a cruel thing to say. It was a nothing thing to say. But I filed it somewhere, the way children file things they don't yet have the language for. And when I eventually went looking for that file, it was exactly where I'd left it. That was the first time I felt the static. I didn't know what it meant yet. The second scene, I was 14. We were at my Aunt Linda's house for Thanksgiving. My father's sister, a warmer woman than either of my parents in every measurable way, and Linda was flipping through old photographs the way people do after a holiday meal. The album spread across the coffee table, and she landed on a picture of my mother pregnant and said, without thinking, "The way you say things that have been true for so long, you stop guarding them. Patricia, you were so tiny carrying Nora, I was amazed." And my mother said, quickly, with a precision I now recognize as practiced, "Pregnancies are different every time." Linda nodded. She turned the page. I was 14 and I was sitting on the floor 3 feet away, and I heard all of it, and I thought nothing of it. Why would I? It was a small moment, a pivot in a conversation. Adults redirecting each other was the background noise of every family gathering I had ever attended. What I know now is that my Aunt Linda did not know about the twin. What I know now is that the phrase, "pregnancies are different every time," was a lid my mother had kept ready for years. For exactly that kind of accidental knock. She had rehearsed containment so thoroughly it looked like casualness. I didn't understand any of that at 14. I just ate my pie. The third scene is the one that still sits in my chest when I think about it. Not because it was the worst, it wasn't, but because I was old enough to understand exactly what was happening, and I still said nothing. I was 22. I had just graduated from Ohio State with a degree in communications and a GPA of 3.7, and my parents drove down for the ceremony. Afterward, we went to dinner at a restaurant near campus, a real restaurant, not a chain. White tablecloths, the kind of place that felt like an occasion. There were 6 of us. My parents, Marcus and his girlfriend at the time, me and my roommate Destiny, who had come because her own family hadn't made the trip. We ordered, the food came, and at some point, my father raised his glass and said he wanted to say something. He talked about Marcus. He talked about how proud he was of Marcus's job in Columbus, Marcus's apartment, Marcus's trajectory for 90 seconds at a celebration dinner for my college graduation. My father spoke about my brother's career. Then he caught himself. I watched him catch himself and added, "And of course, Nora, we're very proud of you too. You worked hard." Destiny looked at me across the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I said, "Thank you, Dad." I picked up my fork. I ate my salmon. That was what I did. I ate the meal. I kept my face composed. I let the toast dissolve into the ambient noise of the restaurant, and I told myself that this was just how he was, that it wasn't personal, that he didn't realize. But something shifted that night. Something went from background static to a frequency I could almost name. What I did not know, could not have known, was that 6 weeks after that dinner, a 22-year-old woman in Phoenix, Arizona named Renata Voss, who had grown up the only child of a couple named David and Carol Voss, had submitted her DNA to a consumer genealogy database. She had been searching for something she couldn't name for years. She thought maybe it was her birth parents. She thought maybe it was medical history. She thought maybe it was just the shape of where she came from. What she found was me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's one more scene before we get to the breaking point, and this one is the one that changed the direction of everything, even before I knew what everything actually was. The fourth scene happened when I was 25, 18 months before my 27th birthday. I had come home for Easter. It was a Sunday. The table was set in the dining room. My Aunt Linda was there with her husband. Two cousins I'll call Ben and Sarah, and Diane, my mother's friend, who has appeared at every major gathering in my memory like a piece of furniture that came with the house. We were seated. My mother had made ham. The rolls were from a bakery in town, the good kind with a crust on them, and at some point during the meal, in a conversation about family history, genealogy had become a topic of mainstream interest by then, thanks to the DNA testing companies. My cousin Ben said he'd done one of those saliva tests and found out he had Scandinavian ancestry he hadn't expected. My mother put down her fork. "I don't think those tests are reliable," she said. My father said, "Patricia is right. The margins of error are significant." I looked at my father. He had never used the phrase margins of error in any context in my living memory. He sold pharmaceutical supplies. He watched football. He had no statistical training that I was aware of. I said, very mildly, "I've read that they're actually quite accurate now." My mother looked at me, not with anger, with something flatter than anger, a kind of assessment. "I think you're mistaken, Nora," she said. "Not everything you read is credible." The table moved on. Ben talked about Scandinavia. Linda said something about her mother's side. The ham was passed again. I sat with my mother's eyes still on me, not quite meeting mine, and I understood, without yet having the language for why, that the conversation about DNA testing had ended because my mother had ended it, and that she had ended it with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with the margins of error. I didn't follow the thread. I should have. I let it go. That was my last mistake. I want to tell you about the night that broke everything open, because it arrived without announcement, the way the most consequential things always do. It was a Tuesday in February, the winter of my 26th year. I was in my apartment in Columbus. I'd stayed in the city after graduation, working as a content coordinator for a mid-sized marketing firm, and I was eating leftover pasta, watching something I don't remember on my laptop when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "I think we might be related." I almost didn't open it. I got spam. Everyone gets spam. But the sending address was a real name. renata.voss@gmail.com, and the preview line below the subject said, "I've been trying to figure out how to write this for 3 weeks." I put down my fork. The email was 4 paragraphs long. It was written carefully, in the way that someone writes something when they have drafted it many times and thrown most of the drafts away. Renata introduced herself. She said she was 26 years old, born March 14, 1997, in Delwood, Ohio, and adopted at 4 days old by a family in Scottsdale, Arizona. She said she had submitted a DNA sample to a genealogy platform 8 months earlier and that my name, well, my DNA profile had come back as her closest match, closer than a first cousin, closer than a half-sibling. The platform flagged us as a probable twin match. She wrote, "I don't want to disrupt your life. I just need to know if this is real." I sat on my couch for a long time after I read that. The pasta got cold, the laptop screen dimmed and went dark. My birthday was March 14, 1997. I was born in Delwood General Hospital. I did not cry. That is the honest truth. I did not cry. I did not panic. I did not call my mother. I sat in the quiet of my apartment with the sound of a truck moving through the street outside and something settling in my chest that was not grief and was not rage. It was recognition. It was the feeling of finally locating the static. I closed the laptop, went to bed, and in the morning I wrote Renata back and said, "I think this is very real. Tell me everything." That was the night the story changed direction. But what I found out over the next 6 months was something I had not been prepared for. And I want to tell you all of it, because some of what I learned was not just about a secret. It was about money, about documents, and about a pattern of decisions my parents had made across 27 years that amounted to something much larger than one hidden adoption. Renata Voss, I want you to understand who she is before I tell you what we did together, because she is not a peripheral figure in this story. She is the other half of it. She is small in the way I am not. I am 5'8". She is 5'3". She has my coloring, the same dark auburn hair, the same pale skin that does something strange in direct sunlight. But her face sits differently. Her nose a little softer, her jaw a little more defined. When we first video called, we both sat in silence for nearly a full minute just looking at each other. It was not a comfortable silence, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people confronting a biological fact. She is a nurse. She works in a pediatric unit in Phoenix. She has a partner named Gil and a rescue dog named Biscuit, and a running habit and a laugh that arrives loudly and without warning. She is organized in the way that people who have spent their lives managing uncertainty tend to be organized. She keeps receipts. She photographs documents. She makes lists. These qualities turned out to be extraordinarily useful. We talked every night for 3 weeks via video call before we made any decisions about what to do. She told me about growing up, about her adoptive parents, David and Carol Voss, who she described as good people who did their best and had been completely honest with her about her adopted status from the time she could understand language. She had always known she was adopted. She had never known she had a twin. She had grown up as an only child the way I had, with the fundamental experience of being singular in her family. And when I told her I had an older brother, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "So you were never really an only child either. You were just made to function like one." I thought about that for a long time. In those 3 weeks of nightly calls, we compared details. Birth dates matched, birthplace matched, our blood types matched, both O positive. We compared photographs from our childhoods and found similarities in the architecture of our ears, the shape of our hands, the way we both tended to look slightly to the left of the camera in every picture taken before the age of 10. Small things, but they accumulated. At the end of those 3 weeks, we ordered a private twin confirmation DNA test through a licensed genetics lab. Not a consumer genealogy product, but a clinical test with a certified chain of custody, the kind whose results are admissible in legal proceedings. It cost $325, and we split it down the middle. The results came back in 11 days. Monozygotic twins. Identical DNA, probability of non-twin relationship, less than 0.001%. We had the document laminated, both of us, same day, independent of each other, and then laughed about it on the phone when we discovered the coincidence. I want to be precise about what we did next and why, because the how of it matters as much as the what. The first call I made after I called Renata to read her the results was to my father's sister, my Aunt Linda. Not my parents, Linda. I called Linda because she was the person in my family who had always spoken to me in a register that assumed I was a full person. She was the one who came to my graduation when my parents left early. She was the one who called on ordinary Tuesdays for no reason. She was the one who had, at a Thanksgiving table years ago, made an innocent remark about my mother's pregnancy and pivoted away without knowing why she was pivoting. I drove to Linda's house on a Saturday morning. She made coffee. I showed her the DNA result on my phone, and I watched her face change in a way that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She didn't say she was shocked. She said, quietly, after a long pause, "I always felt like something was missing in this family. Nora, I never knew what it was." She cried. I did not. I held her hand and let her process it, and then we started to talk about what to do. And Linda, who is nobody's idea of a combative person, straightened up in her chair and said, "You have to know everything before you walk in that door. Everything." She was right, and that was when the work began in earnest. Over the following 4 months, Renata and I built what I can only describe as a case file, not in a litigious sense. We never hired a private investigator, never attempted to subpoena anything, but in the sense that we gathered every document, every record, every piece of verifiable fact that existed in the public record or that we had legal access to, and we assembled it with a precision that I am still proud of. What we found went further than a closed adoption. Here is what the record showed, assembled in the order we found it. Item 1. Renata's adoption records, which her adoptive parents, David and Carol Voss, had retained in full, and which they provided to her without hesitation. Carol drove them to a FedEx location herself and paid the overnight shipping showed. that the adoption had been arranged through a now-defunct private agency called Sunrise Placement Services, based in Columbus, Ohio. The placement agreement was dated March 18, 1997. The surrendering parties were listed as Gerald T. Callahan and Patricia M. Callahan of Delwood, Ohio. The agency fee paid by the surrendering parties was $3,500, as noted on the intake document. Item 2. I requested my own birth certificate through the Ohio Vital Records Office. It arrived in 10 days. It listed my full name, my date of birth, my parents' names, and the name of the attending physician at Delwood General Hospital, a Dr. Raymond Ellsworth, now retired. It listed the birth as singular, one baby. The official state record said there had been one baby. Item 3. We requested Renata's birth certificate. Hers listed the same attending physician, the same hospital, the same date. It listed the birth as singular, one baby. Both of us, born on the same day, in the same hospital, to the same parents, with attending records that had been amended or never correctly filed to show two separate singular births. I want to be very precise about what I am saying here. I am not a lawyer. I am not making legal accusations. What I am saying is that the documents existed and that they said what they said, and that when I showed them to an attorney, a family law attorney named Sandra Okafor, whose office I sat in for 90 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon in September, she looked at them carefully and then looked at me and said, "This is irregular in a way that warrants serious scrutiny." Sandra charged $300 for the consultation. I paid it. She laid out in plain language what the potential implications were of amended birth records in a private adoption context, and she explained what I would need if I wanted to pursue any formal process. I thanked her, took notes, and kept all of my options open. Item 4. The house on Hartwell Drive. This one took longer to find and came from a direction I had not anticipated. My Aunt Linda, who had spent months quietly thinking, came to me in October with something she had been sitting on. She told me that when my parents bought the house on Hartwell Drive in 1998, I was 1 year old. The down payment had been $62,000. She knew this because she had been helping my mother with some financial paperwork at the time and had seen a document. My father's salary at that point in his career would not have supported a $62,000 cash down payment on top of their existing expenses. Linda had known this at the time and had simply not thought about it for 20 years. I looked up the property records. They are public. The purchase price of the house in 1998 was $248,000. The down payment recorded in the deed transfer was $62,000. Renata and I talked about this for a long time. We did not have direct access to my parents' financial records, and we did not attempt to obtain them. But we knew one thing. In 1997, my parents had received $3,500 from a private adoption agency, and in 1998, they had made a $62,000 down payment on a house. Those are facts. What connects them, if anything, was not something I could prove. But I wrote it down, and I kept it in the file. And I looked at it often. Item 5. The man I did not recognize in my parents' living room on the afternoon of my 27th birthday. I will get to him. He is important. But first, I need to tell you what happened in the weeks leading up to that birthday and what Renata and I decided to do. By November of my 27th year, we had the DNA confirmation, the adoption records, both birth certificates, the consultation notes from Sandra Okafor, the property records, and a timeline Renata had built in a shared document that ran to 14 pages. We had photographs of ourselves side by side. We had a video recording of our first visual call, kept not for any dramatic purpose, but because Renata, who is a nurse and thinks like one, had understood from the beginning that documentation is care. We had talked about every possible approach. We had talked about writing a letter. We had talked about showing up at the house with a lawyer. We had talked about saying nothing and simply existing in the parallel, which was a version of the life we had already been living. But we kept coming back to one thing. My parents had made 11 people complicit in a reality that was not real. Aunt Linda, cousins, Diane, everyone who had ever sat at that table and participated in the narrative of our family without knowing what the narrative excluded, and the man I did not recognize would later turn out to have been placed in that room for a reason I still find breathtaking in its arrogance. We decided we were going to do this in the open, not for spectacle, not for viral content, though I will tell you in a moment what we did with the camera. We did it in the open because the thing my parents had been done in secret, and we had learned slowly, over 27 years between the two of us, that their secrets required our silence to survive. We were not going to be silent. Renata booked a flight from Phoenix to Columbus for March 12th, 2 days before our birthday. She stayed with me. She slept in my room. I gave her my bed and slept on the couch because I am taller and my couch is longer. On the first night she was there, we ordered pizza, mushroom, and pepperoni, because we discovered independently that we both pick off the olives, and sat on my living room floor with the case file between us, and went through it one more time. We were not angry in the way that the word angry usually means. We were purposeful. There is a difference. We set up the camera, my laptop, positioned on a shelf, angled to capture the sitting area. On March 14th, our 27th birthday, 40 minutes before I called my mother to say I was coming over and that I was bringing a friend, my mother said, "Oh, wonderful, we have a little something planned." She did not ask the friend's name. I said, "We'll be there at 2. We arrived at the house on Hartwell Drive at 1:58 p.m. I had driven past that house 10,000 times. I knew the sound the gravel made under the car tires. I knew the specific creak of the porch step, the second one from the top. I knew the way the front door stuck slightly in, cold weather, and had to be lifted a quarter inch before the key would turn. Renata sat in the passenger seat and looked at the house for a moment before she got out. She didn't say anything. I didn't ask her to. We went up the porch steps. The second one creaked. I opened the door. The living room was fuller than I expected. Aunt Linda was there. She knew what was happening. She was the only one who did. And she was seated in the armchair near the window, her hands in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. My two cousins, Ben and Sarah, were on the couch. Diane was there, standing near the fireplace with a glass of white wine. My brother Marcus was there, which surprised me. He rarely came home for anything that wasn't Christmas. And there was the man I didn't recognize. He was perhaps 65 years old. He was wearing a sport coat over a collared shirt, the kind of outfit that suggests occasion. He was seated in the chair closest to my father, and my father was standing near him in the posture of someone who has just introduced someone else. My mother was standing in the center of the room. She saw me first. She smiled. Then she saw Renata. The smile changed, not disappeared, changed into something that required visible effort to hold in place. I watched her face perform that effort. I had never watched my mother's face perform anything before. I had spent 27 years taking her expressions at face value. My father saw Renata next. He went very still. 11 people in the room, including the man I didn't know, including Linda, who was watching everything. My mother said, "Nora, how wonderful. You brought a friend." Her voice was even. I will give her that. She had spent 30 years practicing containment, and in that first moment it held. I said, "Mom, Dad, this is Renata." I let it sit there. And then, because she is braver than anyone in that room, including me, Renata said, "Hello? I was born at Delwood General Hospital on March 14, 1997. You were my parents. I have the documentation." She held up the folder. It was a simple manila folder. It had a binder clip on it. She had labeled it in her neat nurse's handwriting, "Callahan Voss Adoption Records." Nobody moved. My father looked at my mother. My mother did not look at my father. She looked at me, and in her eyes was something I had seen before and never been able to name. That flat assessment, that calibration, and I understood that what she was calculating, even now, was not how to tell the truth. It was whether the truth could still be managed. It could not. And that is when she said it. "You are not our real daughter. You never were. And frankly, looking at you standing there, I think we always knew we made the wrong choice." She was speaking to Renata, but her eyes were on me. 11 people heard it. Aunt Linda made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, the kind that escapes before language catches up. Marcus said, "Mom." My father said nothing. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because there was nothing that needed to be said in that moment. We had not driven to that house to argue. We had not assembled 4 months of documentation to have a conversation. We had come because some truths require a witness to become complete, and there were 11 people in that room, and the camera on the shelf had been recording for 43 minutes. I looked at the man in the sport coat. He had not moved. He had not spoken, but there was something in his posture that I had noticed when I walked in and not yet resolved. A kind of prepared stillness, the stillness of someone who has come to a room expecting to speak. I said calmly, "I don't know who you are." He cleared his throat. He looked at my father. My father gave a small nod. The man said, "My name is Robert Hensley. I'm an estate attorney. I was asked to be present today to discuss some matters related to your parents' estate planning." I looked at my father. My father looked at the floor. Here is what I learned in the next 20 minutes as Robert Hensley spoke, in the careful, hedged language of a man who was doing what he had been hired to do and had begun to suspect he had been placed in a room. Under false pretenses, my parents had updated their estate documents 4 months prior, in November, which was the same month that my Aunt Linda had told me about the down payment. The updated documents altered the distribution of assets in a way that further reduced my share. Marcus was listed as primary beneficiary of the house, which was currently appraised at $387,000. I was listed as a beneficiary of a designated account containing $14,000. There was no provision for Renata in any document. She was legally, as my parents had arranged it, non-existent. Robert Hensley had been brought to the birthday party. To my birthday party, to present this to me in a social context, surrounded by family, in a way that my mother had apparently calculated would make it harder for me to object. She had planned to use my birthday as the delivery mechanism for a legal document. She had not planned on Renata. Robert Hensley finished speaking. The room was absolutely silent. I could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen. I said, "Mr. Hensley, are you aware that my parents surrendered a child for adoption in 1997 and that the birth records were filed as singular deliveries?" He looked at me. He looked at Renata. He looked at the folder in Renata's hand. "No," he said, "I was not aware of that." I said, "You may want to be." Renata opened the folder and placed the twin DNA confirmation on the top. She handed it to him. He read it. He read it again. He set it on his knee and looked at my parents with an expression that was professionally neutral and humanly stricken. My mother said to the room, "This is very dramatic and unnecessary." My Aunt Linda stood up from the armchair. Linda is a quiet woman. She does not raise her voice. She has never, in my memory, confronted my mother directly. She stood up and she said in a voice that was completely steady, "Patricia, there are 11 people in this room and a DNA certificate on that man's knee, and I have sat at your table for 30 years. Do not tell us this is dramatic." My mother looked at her. My mother had no answer for that. I watched her look for one and find nothing. Marcus, who had not moved from his position near the door and had not spoken since his single syllable at the beginning, walked slowly across the room and stood next to me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. It was, I understood, the most significant thing he had done in years. My father sat down in his chair. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He did not speak. And then my mother, my composed, brand-managing, cream-of-mushroom mother, said the thing that defined who she was more precisely than anything else in 27 years. She said we were young and we couldn't afford 2 children. It was a practical decision, and we did the best we could, and I will not be put on trial in my own home. Renata looked at her, just looked, for a long, quiet moment. Then Renata said, "You had 2 daughters. You kept one and sold the other and spent 30 years hoping neither of you would figure it out. I'm not here to put you on trial. I'm here so you have to look at me." Nobody had an answer for that either. The camera recorded all of it. 43 minutes of entry to this moment, plus everything that followed. In the 3 weeks after the birthday, the following happened. In roughly this order. Robert Hensley withdrew from my parents' case. He sent a formal letter of withdrawal citing the discovery of undisclosed information material to the estate documents he had been retained to present. He did not elaborate. He did not have to. My parents retained a new attorney. I know this because Marcus told me. Marcus called me 3 days after the birthday. It was the longest conversation we had had in years. 40 minutes, most of it silence of various kinds. And at the end of it, he said, "I didn't know, Nora. I want you to know that I didn't know." I believed him. I still believe him. Marcus is not a complicated person. He is a person who accepted the advantages given to him without asking why they were given, which is its own kind of moral failure, but it is not the same kind as what our parents did. I told him I believed him. We have been in contact since. It is a fragile thing, and I am being careful with it. My Aunt Linda did not speak to my mother for 4 months. When they did finally speak, Linda told her that she would not pretend things were normal, that the best she could offer was civil, and that it would have to be enough. My mother accepted this. She did not apologize. My father called me once, 6 weeks after the birthday. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was at my desk, and his name appeared on my phone, and I let it ring. He did not leave a voicemail. I have still not spoken to him. The video. We posted the video in 2 parts. The first part was 14 minutes, covering Renata's introduction, the exchange with my mother, and Robert Hensley's involvement. The second part was a 20-minute sit-down conversation between me and Renata, recorded 2 days later in my apartment, in which we explained the documentation we had assembled, what the adoption records showed, and what the estate documents had said. We did not post it for revenge. I want to be clear about that. We posted it because we had spent 27 years living inside a story that someone else had written for us, and we wanted to write our own. The first video reached 2.3 million views in 10 days. The second reached 1.7 million. The comments were what you would expect, some supportive, some skeptical. Some people who wanted to discuss the legal implications at length. A journalist from a mid-sized publication wrote a piece about private adoption records and birth certificate amendments in Ohio. Sunrise Placement Services. The agency that had facilitated Renata's adoption had been dissolved in 2009, but the piece raised questions about their practices that resulted in a records request from a state investigative office. I am not responsible for what that office finds or does not find. I provided the documents I had. The rest is not mine to control. My mother has not contacted me, not once, in the month since the birthday. She has not written, called, texted, or appeared. The silence feels like her. It is entirely consistent with who she has always been. She is still managing the story. She simply can't manage this one anymore. The estate documents. I eventually connected with Sandra Okafor again, and we discussed options. The situation is ongoing, and I will not detail it further here because it involves legal processes that are not yet complete. What I will say is that Renata deserves to be accounted for. Whatever that accounting looks like, it needs to happen. Renata and I have met in person 4 times since the birthday. We have seen each other in Columbus and in Phoenix. We are learning each other the way people learn each other, when they do not share a history, carefully, without assumption, with the particular tenderness of 2 people who understand that what they have almost didn't exist. She called me last week from the pediatric ward during her lunch break, and we talked for 8 minutes about nothing in particular, and when she hung up she said, "Talk tomorrow." I said yes. That is what 27 years of silence sounds like when it ends. I am writing this, speaking this, from a place of something I do not want to overclaim. Not peace, exactly. Not closure. Those words have been used too many times by too many people to carry the weight that my particular story requires. What I will say is this. I lost something I cannot fully quantify. I lost 27 years of having a sister. I lost whatever we would have been to each other across that time, the shared Christmases, the phone calls, the ordinary Tuesday conversations about nothing important. I lost the version of my childhood that had a person in it who was genetically identical to me and might have understood, in some cellular way, what I was feeling before I had words for it. I lost that. It is not nothing. It will never be nothing. I also lost something I am less sorry about. I lost the story. The Callahan family story, the colonial on Hartwell Drive, the 11 Sunday dinners, the formal dining room, the cream of mushroom casserole. I lost the mythology I had been an extra in for 27 years. The story where my role was to be the other one, the smaller one, the one who smiled and ate her salmon and said, "Thank you, Dad." I am not that person. I never was. They just needed me to perform her, and I was willing enough, and the performance cost me things I am still itemizing. What I gained is harder to say without it sounding smaller than it is. I gained Renata. I gained my Aunt Linda more fully than I had ever had her before. I gained a different understanding of Marcus, which is still developing. I gained the specific, irreplaceable satisfaction of having assembled the truth with my own hands, from public records and DNA labs, and a FedEx envelope from Carol Voss in Scottsdale, and having walked it into the room where the lie lived, and set it down on a man's knee in a manila folder with a binder clip. I gained the knowledge that I was right, that the static was real, that what I had felt in that house across 27 years was not imagination or ingratitude or sensitivity. It was the pressure of a secret that was too large for one family to contain without everything inside it bending slightly out of shape. If this story moved you in some way, if it touched something you've been carrying, I hope you'll stay with this channel. And I'd like to know what you took from it, because the people listening to these stories are often carrying versions of to their own. Here is what I now understand, standing where I stand. A family is not the people you share a last name with. It is not the people who made the practical decisions about your life before you were old enough to consent. It is not the house, or the table, or the story that gets told at the table. A family is whoever finds you when you go looking, and stays. My name is Nora Callahan. I am 27 years old. I have a twin sister. I found her the same year I lost the version of myself who kept waiting for my parents to see me clearly. She saw me the first time we ever spoke. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything.